1 in 4 Idahoans, or roughly 369,000 people, live with a disability, according to a recent report from BSU in partnership with the Idaho Council on Developmental Disabilities. The rate of violent victimization of those people is nearly 4 times higher than those without a disability. The Council's executive director already knew some of the problems, and in 2007 she learned of its magnitude.
So it was my job at the Council to go around the state and look for leadership amongst the developmental disability community, and I had the great opportunity to interview 108 individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities from all over the state. And it was at that time, unfortunately, I was completely ill-equipped to hear the things that I heard. But of that 108 people that I interviewed, 82 voluntarily provided me with a number of incidents of abuse that they had experienced, many of which were multiple abuses throughout their lifetime. Many people who didn't feel like they had anyone to tell, and when they did tell someone, they didn't feel believed. When they sought out counseling, oftentimes counselors said that didn't really happen, again, not being believed. And the saddest part, I think, that I was left with from all of those interviews was a sense that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities felt like this is just the way it is.
The report, published in May, focused on the experiences from professional stakeholders working with disabled people and in victim services. Stakeholders agreed people with disabilities are more vulnerable to victimization. One of those victims includes 21-year-old Brandon Juarez, the son of Maria Juarez. Idaho Reports spoke to Maria with the help of the Council's certified Spanish interpreter. Brandon is nonverbal and has Down syndrome, but his mother shared 2 incidents of abuse that her son has suffered.
Pues sí, mi hijo cuando tenía aproximadamente 16 años.
Yeah, when my son was 16, and the agency picked him up for therapy, and about 30 minutes later, they returned him home. When the woman brought him back home, she let me know that he had some little bruises on him, but that he was just fine. And my other children were playing in the yard. They were playing with water, and he wanted to play in the water as well. And so I took his shirt off. So when I proceed to remove his shirt, I see that he has bruises all over his body, particularly around the ribs area, and in his back, as if he had been dragged. His back was all blue, so I was like, oh my gosh, what? They told me it was something not serious, but looking at him, he was covered in bruises.
She told the social worker and asked to speak to the occupational therapist and the person in charge.
La sorpresa que yo me llevo cuando llama la jefa de la agencia, llama a la trabajadora y me dice.
I asked her what had happened, and she said, "Oh, what we did with Brandon is to keep him safe, for his well-being." And I was very angry, and I asked, "Why do you say it was for his well-being? If he has bruises and he seems like he's being dragged and he's being just abused?" And she told me that there was things that they had to do to keep him safe for his well-being. And I responded to them that that's not what I do to keep him safe and for his well-being. That whenever he goes in a crisis, there are things that I do, but I never leave any bruises or drag him.
Maria waited for supervisors to be notified, but never heard back. A police report was never filed, and she stressed that she just wanted to prevent it from happening again.
Lamentablemente, pues, no tuve la.
I feel like I didn't receive the response that I was expecting, and I believe that there was no justice done for the abuse my son went through. So to be honest, trust towards the system is gone. Just because I felt that there was no justice done. I felt like my son and my family were invisible to everybody else. that nobody could see us, nobody could hear us, and it was very difficult.
The process of reporting any abuse was especially hard for Maria because her son is nonverbal and her first language is Spanish. Brandon again suffered abuse by a roommate at his supported living facility, and Maria was informed by an employee. She ultimately moved her son to a different facility where she believes he's now safe. She wants to see an agency established to report abuse and neglect with a number to call, much like we have with 911.
Las barreras que
The main barrier for myself as a Latino woman is the language barrier, and it is a case also for others in the Latino community. But for people with disabilities in general, the main barriers is not being heard, not being believed when they report. In many cases, when there is a little bit of aggression involved, people think that that gives them the right to abuse them and beat them, and that's not right.
The recent study on victimization among people with disabilities offers several recommendations to create change.
I think some of the highlights in that report was there's no tracking of somebody who's accused of taking advantage of somebody with disabilities. There's no register, and maybe they just go somewhere else. And I think that's a valuable thing to say, okay, but how do we track it? Who does it get reported to?
The council would also like to see one number implemented where people with disabilities can call to report abuse.
Our system is very fragmented in the state of Idaho. People with disabilities don't know who to call. We were really looking at some other states who have implemented one phone number that's like a hotline, and we think that that might improve the ability for people to report abuse, because there would just be one number to call, one number to remember, and then it would be up to us to figure out how do we have agencies work together to make this work for people with disabilities instead of people with disabilities trying to figure out how to make it work for themselves.
Staffing is an ongoing problem for people with disabilities, and following a request from former Minority Leader Senator Michelle Stennett, the Office of Performance Evaluations will release a report in January on the issue.
The council also feels very strongly that we need a whole lot more training to better equip our direct support workforce with the skills that they need to be able to be trauma-informed in providing services and supports to individuals. They need a whole cadre of training and ongoing training so that they can provide the best possible support to make the best possible day for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities.